Alright, draft physics video. Yay. Anyway, alright, back to commenters and just making my counter arguments so they can't make some argument as if I did not address the stuff. So some of this might get into ether and such like that. But the first comment is on the two-slit again from the same idiot with the obnoxious eat me name. Anyway, so he posts a link to a PDF file. Below to that. There's your fucking evidence. Okay, so this is supposed to be evidence of how the pattern is actually a nice gradation in the two-slit experiment, and proving that all the other images are broken somehow, the ones that don't look like that, and that the truth is known through some electronic device in some way. This paper says none of that. It's just the instructions for a kit for doing a two-slit experiment that's from, I think, New York University. I would assume it's fairly old, as it cites as the reference material, 1965 Feynman book. I mean, it's pretty bad. And there's just nothing in here. I mean, I'll read some of it. It's just, it's the same jargon, and there's no experiment conducted by this paper. It's just instructions on how to use a device made for doing two-slit experiments, and the device isn't made to demonstrate the precision of the pattern. It's just made to detect the pattern, not the precision of the pattern. So it even says using instruments like a large, I can't remember the word they use, but large scope photodiode, photoresistor. So it's a big one, not a small, tiny thing. So it's not detecting individual photons, it's not scanning the pattern, it's not doing any of that stuff. And then they use a photomultiplier to do it, with low light, and again, but with no precision. They're just looking at hunks of pattern and not millimeters of pattern. Anyway, so it really has nothing to do with the subject, doesn't prove anything, doesn't demonstrate anything, and on top of that, the experiment isn't even performed in this brief. So that's not what's called evidence, fella. Is light a wave or a particle? The Dutch physicist Christian Huygens advocated that light was a wave. Huygens' principle is often used to describe how waves in general propagate. So let's understand, Huygens relies on some notion of a single photon creating an infinite number of wavelets. And this is good physics. In my book, it's made-up physics. And not good. It's not good using infinite things as an explanation. In 1704, Newton published the first edition of the book, whatever it is, in which he championed the notion that light consisted of particles which we now call photons. Yes, corpuscles. I don't know if he said the word particles. I think he said corpuscles. Thomas Young performed a two-slit experiment in 1801. Yes, and Newton had already performed a single-slit experiment in 1650 or something, and 62, whatever. And demonstrating the effect of fringes. The dark bands observed by Young can only be explained by destructive interference. So again, these are statements that you're supposed to take seriously as some kind of, this is how physics, how scientists deal with the evidence. So they say the dark bands observed by Young can only be explained by destructive interference. A wave, not a particle. Somehow, it's the only possible explanation. It would be ludicrous to consider any other explanation, that there could be something called electrons, and that they could be associated with matter, and that they would somehow deflect photons. That can't possibly be an explanation. I mean, so how much, what credibility do you give propaganda this spewed this thick, spread this thick? They don't even consider any alternative theory. We have made the decision. Nothing else can explain it. It's just obnoxious. Maxwell's equations with their wave solutions. So again, Maxwell's equations could just be called ray solutions just as easily. It's all about straight line force. At a frequency, yes, but straight line force. It's not waves in a traditional notion of wave. Also supports the wave theory for light. So again, it says it supports it in which way? How exactly? Show me in Maxwell's equations where there is a wave function, because there isn't. On the other hand, in the early 20th century, there were phenomena involving light that could only be explained by the particle theory. So again, only be explained. So I'll say it, it's just as irresponsible to say the only possible explanation were particle explanations. I'm sure somebody could come up with a wave explanation for Einstein's photoelectric effect. They just didn't even bother. Examples are the photoelectric effect and Compton effects, which is Compton scattering. The light, is light a wave or a particle? So again, this is their stupid question when we know particles can be part of a wave. It happens. Particles can be produced in a wave of particles. I can shoot bullets that way. I can send soldiers that way. The soldiers aren't tied to each other, but there could be a wave of soldiers. And even radio waves is a perfect demonstration where we can synthetically create individual photons that are traveling straight lines, but we can create them in groups that could be considered waves, because that's exactly how they'll appear. Now, they won't function exactly like a wave in that they won't spread force the way waves will. They won't go around corners the way waves will. There's lots of things they won't do like a wave. So again, just make my argument for me. This isn't good science. This is rubbish. As a preamble to an experiment, this is a piece of rubbish. Can only be explained with particle theory. Examples are the photoelectric effect and Compton effects. Alright, now is light a wave or particle? Is it both, but not at the same time? So that's what they say. It is both, but not at the same time. And that's science. It's both, but not really. I mean, that's scientific. That's how an intelligent person deals with the conflicting evidence. It's both, but not at the same time. It's magic. Whether the particle or wave description is used, description. So whether it's described as a wave or a particle, not what it is, not how it's actually moving through space, is used depends on the question being asked. And there's not even a question. You don't even need to ask a question. You mean it's depending on what the observation is. Depending on what bits of evidence you're collecting. Whether you're going to see the wave part or whether you're going to see the particle part. So they're not even getting it right. No one's asking a question. We're observing evidence. Questions about the propagation of light require wave theory. They don't require it. You've just stated that you're only going to focus on it, and that's all they focused on. Some questions about the interaction of light with matter require a particle theory. Again, some questions. You mean some interactions can only be explained in the sense that the particles clearly are independent agents and they don't do anything collectively. This is commonly called wave-particle duality. There is nothing in our macroscopic world that corresponds to this duality. So, and that's another way of saying, well, yeah, okay, we don't have any reason to believe this much because there's absolutely nothing in the universe that behaves this special way, but we believe it anyway, and we're going to propagandize it anyway, and we're going to sell this idea anyway, instead of just recognizing that maybe they don't have the right answer. Maybe they don't know what it is. Maybe they just should say they don't really understand. Where, from my perspective, I can say I do understand that particles can appear like a wave, but that doesn't mean they're waving. They can be in a formation that is wave-like, but they will not function as a wave. And that's what the evidence demonstrates. You have seen the two-slit interference patterns and may have observed them in a lab. Okay, so this is just, blah, 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 preamble to the experiment. But anyway, so this is like something from the 70s or 60s even. I mean, it's not, number one, it's not well written. It's, and it doesn't have any information. It seems to me that even the experiment setup is a little bit more complicated than is necessary. They're doing both photo diode detection and photo multiplier detection with the same device, which just seems kind of silly. They have a laser and a light bulb, and going through the same apparatus. It just doesn't seem to make much sense. So they do have both the laser and the light bulb go through an initial single slit before the light is transferred to the double slit, which again does create some problems. Some pollution problems. Anyway, and they're reading the results on an oscilloscope, and again, so it's not like they're using some kind of great photographic technique or something else to get a lot of detail. It's not the best way to collect the information, blah blah blah. So nothing like a proof of what this asshole claims. I must believe. Alright, so he says there's your fucking evidence. Okay, so not evidence of any of the points at issue. The fact that the pattern is supposed to be a gradual gradation between light and dark. Since you are such an asshole, I doubt that you'll even read the fucking paper. Well, I doubt that you read it, because if you did read it, you'd realize it doesn't have experimental results in it, which says photodiodes are used to measure light intensity. Well, I guess you didn't see the part in their paper where it pointed out that it's a large face photodiode. They actually called it that, a large face, large surface photodiode. So clearly it's not taking little tiny measurements in tiny locations. So again, you lose. Measure light intensity in double slit experiment. So again, and he thinks that's how it's traditionally done, when it's not traditionally done that way. That's a tiny percentage of the experiments are done with photodiodes, not the majority of them. Also, you can't understand that photons you look at have a f-stop, which doesn't make any difference. I mean, our eyes adjust, and we can also adjust the surface that the light's hitting to adjust the brightness so it doesn't get oversaturated. So those are all issues that we can fix. That's too low to capture the full range of light. Yeah, we can't capture low lux light, but we can certainly capture the difference between 70% photons and 10% photons. There's an abrupt cutoff after which any light bright enough just shows up as white light. Well, it doesn't, to say it's white is I'll say to that. Clearly it can be oversaturated, too much light for us to make a distinction, but again, you can fix for that, even though there is a range or depth not being captured. So again, he's saying that somehow we can't see the pattern, and I think that's just rubbish. There's lots of surfaces you can project the pattern on to balance out the extremes. You want to see the brights, you can make the surface darker. If you want to see the dim parts, you can make the surface lighter. Sorry if that's too fucking technical for you. Well, I'm sorry that you don't understand what a camera can do, and that you can completely alter f-stops and all kinds of apertures with a camera and take a photograph of the pattern. I can't say it's any simpler. So, well, you didn't say anything simpler. You're just making this bold accusation that you have some evidence that this real pattern is different than the one seen and projected and captured with all kinds of electronic devices, and you're just claiming all of those devices are somehow wrong, and you're not providing evidence of this device capturing anything differently. There's no evidence in your document. There's no evidence of what the experiment produced, idiot. I can't say it any simpler so that someone with a 5-second memory and a second grade vocabulary can follow. Well, again, You didn't say anything. You just proved again how you're just a propagandist. You don't really know the subject. You don't provide any real evidence of anything. You just spout your dogma and claim everybody who doesn't believe it is some sort of criminal against logic. No, you're the criminal. You're the one breaking the rules. You're the one making claims you're not defending with evidence, fuckhead. So you won't understand. Well, fuck you. Fuck you is what I'll say. Yeah, so that was in the spam folder. I didn't put it there, but that's where it was. And I'll delete it since I've read it. And he can go fuck himself. Do your eat meing on somebody. Go play that game with somebody who's too big a piece of shit to figure out they're not going to take your insults. You Weasley little piece of shit. Okay. So, publish comments. Right, bastard. Anyway, I gotta move that over. I don't know why this changes every time, but whatever. That should be close enough. So these are new comments. Let's see what this is. Mark Creekwater. I wish you wouldn't do this time code stuff unless you're actually going to quote what I said. I'm not playing my videos over again just for your comment. I mean, fuck. The blonde guy has a problem describing that photons are waves of very special kind. I don't know what blonde guy means, but if you're referencing me, I'm not the one who has a problem because I don't think photons wave, idiot. I suggest one visualize them as smoke rings. How does that make them corpuscular then? Which requires why they travel like little bullets and mountains at the same time. Again, I don't think I've had any problem explaining that, so you can say that. Energy density, well, fuck that concept, even though they move at the speed of light. I don't know. So he's got a reference to two shitty videos of some kind, apparently. Useless tripe, no doubt. 36 seconds, brilliant. So we have a smoke ring shooter as an explanation of what photons are doing, when smoke rings are actually doing the whatever the word is, the tornado thing. So they're not moving anything like photons would be moving through space. It's if you want to say it, there's some sort of parallel. Well, you can't really parallel it because the two things have nothing to do with each other. Photons move in one direction. Smoke rings are moving in the little bits are moving in all kinds of directions. They're not only moving that way, but they're also, doing the centrifugal thing. Anyway, irrelevant mush. Fuck you. All right, at 9:05, yes, says that he can't explain. Oh, man, my eyes are just terrible today. The source of the energy in our universe. Perhaps it's the result of the Big Crunch, the opposite of the Big Bang. No, well, I don't really think they're the opposite of each other. You can only have one at the origin, you either bang or you crush. I don't think at the origin you could be crushing it, but whatever. Of the material in an eternal universe which produces energy in our present universe. Well, again, that really doesn't explain how you disperse energy into the universe in some sort of somewhat even manner to create something like a pressure that would cause gravity. So again, that really doesn't explain a source for the energy. And my only argument with ether theorists isn't that they have to give me some source of energy in the universe. They have to provide an explanation for why that force can behave in two fundamentally different ways, that is, as rays and waves, and that they don't do. So anyway, wow, there's a great shout out, really interesting channel, thank you. That's, I guess, the dissonant science thing, which I don't think is such a great channel anymore. Same old, same old. No evidence. Big on talk, little on evidence. Jeff / DraftScience. I don't know who that is. I believe I can answer the question, where did the energy come from? Alright, so this is Fractal Woman. I did read her paper, and she accounts for it. Gee, I'm trying to think of a way to say it, and I'm probably not going to come up with one. It's like it's a bunch of residual vibration energy kind of left over. Oh, okay, so he's saying Jeff / so this was the Jeff Yee guy. Alright, so anyway, while I was on vacation in the Bahamas last week, I had a chance to read Particles of the Universe 2, which is a weird title. Like I said, it is a little disrupted. So that's his new book. When he believes in ether, I mean, it's just, I don't know why you're calling them particles when you believe in ether, but whatever, because it rained a lot. And I have to say, well done. It is mind-blowingly brilliant. She's an ether person, by the way. She's a big fan of Ken Wheeler, so her testimony is a little tainted from my perspective. Theological and most importantly accessible. I can't say enough good things about the book and this theory. That said, in the book, Jeff uses analogy of a pool and an earthquake causing an initial wave of energy. Right, which you have to explain where the earthquake came from. I also used the earthquake analogy in a paper I presented at the CNPS conference last summer. Basically, I analogize a gravity wave detection to a detection of a P wave of an earthquake caused by the collision of black holes. So again, they're using, really, in my opinion, completely suspect science as evidence of something. I refer to this as an etherquake P wave, or longitudinal component of the seismic wave. This fits in well with Jeff's theory. Well, I don't know how it fits in where you convert matter into some sort of gravity wave, first off, and it's a gravity wave that clearly is particulate in that it doesn't go around objects, it moves in a straight line. So this is where these theories break down, that gravity is caused by longitudinal ether waves. So again, alright, so now we'll get to the little bit of drawing, I guess. And I'll try to be fair and try to explain what I see as a big problem in the ether theory. Alright, so basically, I guess that can be moved down a little, and this will be in the paper. Alright, so alright, so the waves are coming off of, say, the little particles. Well, let's not even say little. Alright, let's just say gravity waves. The idea is that these forces that they're calling a wave clearly behave. Okay, so I mean, this can look like a wave, right? You can have stuff and then no stuff and then stuff and then no stuff. And the point is this stuff does two things. I mean, it's coming at waves, but when you detect it, it's coming as a particle, in the sense that it doesn't move around surfaces, it doesn't bend or something, it doesn't have friction, they're not all tied together. It's just it's a single bit of energy that arrives somewhere. And that's what photons are. It's a single little bit, it's a single little ray that you can draw its history and you can understand where exactly it came from. And so this idea that you can have it both ways, that you can have these things that act really independently, you know, as little corpuscles, and at the same time you're going to play this game as if they're somehow tied together as a wave, in that they're perturbating through a substance. So it's like they're coming up with a theory of ether, and the problem with their theory is that you don't, so say you cause a perturbation, you know, the material thing says earthquake or perturbation or bump, the problem with what they're arguing is that they're claiming that this thing can move in a coaxial cable kind of manner, that it moves this wave in a straight little line, that it doesn't spread like a normal wave. And so when this big wave happens, like a big gravity wave from a black hole, it's just really just saying, they're just really basically conceding it's just a little bunch of little things that are, you know, in sequence with each other and creating what appears to be a wave. But it's not made of anything wavy. So the problem with their theory of ether is, how does the ether transmit in every single direction, you know, no matter where I perturbate, from whatever angle? How could you set up dominoes, so to speak, that they'll always flip in a straight line? I mean, from any direction. I mean, there's no way you can mechanically understand that to be possible, really. You know, they could be, unless you consider them to be like little pegs, you know. And then you have to do something about the fact that the diagonal lines are going to be wrong. You know, they're not going to be able to hit each other. You know, it's mechanically awkward. And I guess I would argue that once you're going to concede the point that your waves move in straight lines, you know, and that they're not spreading over a whole surface, and that they don't create effects, energy effects, at all these locations. They only create an energy effect at one single location, one tiny, tiny little energy effect. Then you're basically conceding, you know, you might as well not, you don't need the ether. Just get rid of the ether and just concede that, no, this thing just released the particle, and the particle travels and it arrives at a destination, and you don't need to have an ether. Alright, and the other argument I've made is that the energy problem is that if you're going to have an ether, if you're going to say there is this ether, then again you're going to have an ether that's highly compressive to create something like gravity. I mean, gravity is a huge force. Now, it's, you know, as much as they say it's a weak force, it's an incredibly strong force. It's moving galaxies around. It's doing all kinds of shit. And so you have to concede that your ether is already got all tons and tons of movement in it from this thing called gravity. And you know, you have to account for that huge amount of energy that's already in your ether. That even when your ether appears quiet, your ether has this huge amount of energy, where you can have something called like a you know, insufficient. You have strong waves here, and you have quiet waves here, because they're blocked by these two things and end up pushing together. I mean, they're stuck with the same kind of problem. They have to explain why this moves into that, and they have to do it with some sort of wave that's creating pressure. I'm just saying it's just so much easier just to say, nah, it's particles. Why bother with this third? Why put the extra step of an ether in there when you can account for it as just energy in the universe, a kind of heat in the form of photons that are invisible, photons not at a frequency, and that's why you can't see them. You know, kind of obviously, they don't affect electrons as aggressively in terms of breaking atoms as photons that are at a frequency. So I don't know if there's anything to add to that. So I just see it as a huge redundancy, and it doesn't, you know, they don't touch subjects, well, they don't touch them well, like magnetism. You know, why this, how does the ether know the difference, you know, between the X and the Y pole of the magnets? How does the ether interpret that difference and create a different reaction depending on how I flip this magnet? I flip it and I get a completely opposite reaction, and they really don't explain any of that with ether theories. So I think, you know, yeah, that'll have to do. I mean, I probably should have done a video closer to the time when I actually read her paper. Then I would have had a more complete response to the different problems I saw in it. Alright, let's see where else go here. Okay, caused by black holes. Yes, already read it all. Alright. So, Einstein, you said enough. He was a fraud. I mean, it's just a stupid comment. Unless you want to point out some reason why you think he was a fraud and how exactly he was a fraud. You know, I mean, it's just a stupid statement. I think he was wrong. I think his theory is clever. And, you know, clearly he did put up in the sense that, well, I don't know if he put up by him. He didn't do it by himself. He obviously had Max Planck's help in doing the mathematics for Mercury's precession. But yeah, that can just be a reconstruction. I mean, obviously they knew how far off Newton was, so they knew how much they had to find, you know, in terms of error. So yeah, that's a little bit of a, we'll just construct a formula that creates that much stuff to fix the problem. I mean, you know, creates the stuff necessary. And again, you could sort of do that with Maxwell's equations in the terms that Maxwell's equations are about induction, and you're basically saying gravity is inductive, and that the sun's center of gravity is actually moving. Alright, anyway, Richard Stone, thank you for your videos. Your ICOV is extensive, worthy note. I feel compelled to thank you. Well, it's all very nice, but probably too nice. Thank you. He actually, I think this is the guy, right? Yeah, I've been modeling. Yeah, this part was interesting. Read this. I've been modeling, simulating, actually, big difference. Your theory, initially open as an open-minded test of your ideas. For almost a year now, and although still a long way from being presentable, possibly a year or so, what I'm seeing so far is astounding. I'm at the stage where it all seems so obvious now. The beauty and simplicity of how well this works and how many other observations it explains. Well, yeah, I mean, the fact that it... Look, I mean, you know, anybody who wants to go back on this channel, I mean, this just started with an argument about gravity, and it just did magnetism so perfectly, and then it just time dilation, and then the nuclear forces. It just all fell into place. So I think that is kind of evidence that it can't be nonsense if it, you know, if it fits so well with so little modification, so little. You have to fudge with it so little to make it work for all these different things. That's strong evidence that it, you know, wrong theories don't do that. And so, you know, strong evidence. So I just had to stop, and a quick thanks. Yeah, well, thank you. And if you ever do get any model up to presentation quality, I would appreciate it. Anyway, alright, so Benjamin C. Drake. I'm trying to understand your shadow idea as an explanation for gravity. Well, it's not that complicated, and if you just look up Mach gravity, it's an idea that's been around 300 and something years. I mean, obviously I've improved it by polarizing it, but anyway, you know, it's just, all you're really doing is the inverse square law. How many times does this have to be said? I mean, you're just creating a vacuum, if you want to think of it that way, or you're creating an external pressure. But the idea is it's just something, it's like a drain and there's water coming in. So you can either think of it as the drain is pulling the water, or you can think of the water pushing in as making it go down the drain. It doesn't really matter. And it's just at a certain rate. Gravity has a certain rate of doing that based on how massive the object is. So the bigger it is, the more it can suck, so to speak. The more volume. So there's just nothing here to argue. You know, in terms of you're having a hard time. Well, you're having a hard time with you know, a concept that's been known for a long time, the inverse square law. I would think in a way the atmosphere is analogous to the smallest scale, in which the smallest bits are just kinetically banging into each other and exchanging direction. Well, the atmosphere isn't really doing that. The atmosphere is first under high pressure, which, you know, is forcing the particles into arrangement with each other in terms of their repulsive energy is essentially creating tension. So they're being forced to be closer to each other than they want to be, which means they're tied to each other by that pressure. So if it's like forcing too many people on a train and one person moves and then everybody else has to move, you know. Alright. Except that instead it's with the molecules that make up the air. So again, the bits aren't under any pressure. They're not in tension with each other. The force bits are not in tension with each other. Photons do not repel photons. Photons couldn't give a shit about photons. They couldn't give a shit about gravity, and they couldn't give a shit about magnetism. They don't react to each other at all. They're not under any pressure themselves. They are the pressure. Again, it's like the soldier analogy. The soldiers can come charging, but the soldiers aren't connected to each other. If one of them goes down, it doesn't slow the other guys down at all. There's no change in their function. So if we had a perfectly sealed chamber to remove wind, and we could somehow suspend two bowling balls near one another, one would expect them to gradually move towards each other via shadowing. Well, that's exactly the experiment they did. They did a little bit different. I mean, they took two lead balls and put them on a stick, alright, and then put another heavy thing, you know, near it, and then put the whole thing on a glass thread and just saw how much the thing moved when you put it next to the closer to the other heavy thing. And that's how they measured the force of gravity, and that's how they determined how much the Earth weighs, and then that gave them how much the Sun weighs. So that's what they did, exactly that experiment. So you're saying it like, well, that silly experiment won't work. Well, it exactly did work. That's exactly how they measured the force of gravity. It might help to suppose this is being done with the sealed chamber in orbit. That's why there's BG felt. Oh, 0G felt. Well, in orbit there's really not 0G. You're falling in the gravity. So you're free falling. That's why there's 0G, because you're actually falling. To have the round movement, you have to fall to make it round. That's why there's no gravity, because you're free falling. I'm inclined to think this wouldn't work. And it does. There'd still be air in between the bowling balls, and the molecules of the air are still kinetically banging into each other. Well, the whole point was is they, you know, obviously they grounded all of the objects, you know, took the charge all off them, so no charge effects could be responsible. So they all had the same charge, and therefore logically would not, their charge condition wouldn't be the thing blamed for any movement. Let's see, air between the bowling balls and the molecules of the air are still kinetically banging into each other. Yeah, well, the whole point is you have to do something heavy enough where the air is not going to affect them. So clearly, yes, they didn't do it outside in the wind. They did as much as they could to make air irrelevant, but the air pressure is even on both sides of the bowling ball, so it's not going to push them together. Bang into each other in this region. Bowling balls and the molecules of the air are still kinetically banging into each other in this region, contracting. The sides of the net force that you are choosing to pay attention to. So again, there's no change in the air pressure. Air pressure goes around corners. Air pressure isn't a straight line force. Air pressure isn't a fundamental force. It's the magnetic force between the molecules that's the fundamental force. And that's made of these photons reflecting off the electrons. And if I'm right, well, I think you're wrong, I would think your explanation wouldn't for gravity work for the same reason. Yes, and he says, am I missing something? Yes, you're missing that the experiment's already been done 150 years ago. And you can't really compare mediums that are under tension to forces that aren't. So again, any analogies, you have to be careful with what you're analogizing, because they can, again, a radio wave can appear like water waves. And if you could actually reflect light off of the radio waves as they're being transmitted, and cut them into 2 dimensions instead of 3 dimensions, and just be able to see the thickness of the photons, it would look like water waves, except it would be, it probably wouldn't be, gradually on, gradually off. It would just be a lot of photons and then no photons, but it would have that appearance of being force and then no force and then force and then no force and then force. So the up and down part, the on off part, would be visible, and so it would look like a wave of water but it wouldn't act anything like a wave in water. And clearly the experiments they've done, I've pointed out the flaw in the logic in terms of using radio waves with 2 transmitters trying to create wave interference, when all you're really creating is you're jamming one frequency with the other same frequency. You can't you can't have like 2 radio signals. You can't have them on the same channel broadcasting from 20 feet away from each other different music and be able to tune one of them in and not the other. You can't do that. If it's the same frequency, the 2 signals are going to get completely messed up and you're going to get crap. So and the whole idea of them interfering is just because once you change the phase of the 2 signals, so now they're coming at a different phase, your radio is still fucked because it can't tune one in and not the other. It's and to the receiver, the signal is going to just seem like a much higher frequency signal, twice the frequency actually. It's going to dispose of it as being not the correct frequency. So you're just jamming the frequency. You're not changing how much stuff is actually getting to a location. You're not changing how much energy. You're not changing the waves at all. They're not interfering. The photons aren't interfering with each other at all. You're just jamming your own radio signal. Alright, you should be fun at parties. Well, I used to be. So anyway, yeah, it's just funny. Then the idiot with the Miles Mathis nonsense still doesn't have a clue. I guess I should have posted a comment telling him you don't have a clue, do you? The stupid ostrich guy. He left some comments on the Amindum channel I don't really like much. Let's see. I believe in the expanding universe. The universe or God or whatever. Yeah, well, whatever. See, you just... your icon is fitting. I mean, ostriches are not very smart. So, at least you're appropriately advertising yourself. So anyway, that's probably enough. That's all the comments there are, so I guess that's enough, and such. So, move on to the next bit of whatever, crapola. And so till the next time, and such. Stop. Yeah, I don't know what happened to Hoffa. He was supposed to be doing the cubed beam splitter, but apparently he had some trouble with the police. This dog probably murdered somebody. Anyway, till the next time and such.